The man, the myth, the legend, André Rieu, is thought to be the most alive and full of energy musician of our time. But look how he breaks the trust of all his fans. As he finally takes his last breaths, André Rieu built his whole career on the idea that music never dies. He made waltzes feel like a song for regular people, not something locked and old. Vienna concert halls. For many years, he promised his orchestra would play in every corner of the world. But when he came to Mexico in 2024, the promise broke. He got sick after 2 shows and 4 more. Concerts were canceled. Thousands of fans who had waited for years to see him were left outside empty buildings. The world didn't get answers. They got silence. The announcement only said illness. It didn't explain why one of the world's most hardworking performers suddenly stopped. His son Pierre, who runs the orchestra, faced angry crowds and upset event planners. People were asking if this was the end. That silence made something darker grow. Social media pages began saying he was gone. Fake death notices spread. Within hours, hashtags and fan pages treated it as a goodbye. This wasn't the first time sickness had stopped him. In 2010, a virus infection in his ear balance nerve left him dizzy and unable to perform. He talked about it later as the worst time of his life. Concerts were canceled across Europe. He was stuck in bed for weeks and said that he thought he might never come back. Fans who remembered that breakdown right away made comparisons. Was history happening again? Behind the Mexico cancellation were details people only learned in pieces. The city's high altitude left some orchestra members gasping for air. Really, they couldn't breathe. Donna Alberti, one of his singers, said she had to stop during practice because she couldn't breathe right and had nosebleeds. Crew members talked about being exhausted. Rumors spread of more serious problems from pneumonia to a hidden heart problem. None were proven true. What was certain was that this time the damage went further. Then one night, Pierre admitted they had to send home about 125 crew and give back close to 40,000 tickets. The money loss was huge, but the emotional pain was worse. André himself admitted he was shaken. He said, "I cannot start a tour like this again." He was 74 years old in a business where age had already ended most careers. The orchestra that once seemed like it couldn't be stopped had been stopped. For fans, it felt final. The quiet in Mexico City was described as like a funeral. No music, no final bow, just an empty space that people filled with sadness. What made this hurt more was the difference. Just days before, André had walked on stage, smiling, bowing, promising more nights of happiness. Now, the same fans were watching his team roll up cables and load trucks. In silence, the change was too fast. In that silence, talk of death grew. Not an official death, not medical proof, but the cultural kind, where people say goodbye to the thing that meant everything to them. André's history makes these rumors easy to believe. After the 2010 sickness, doctors warned him about stress and long flights. At the time, he ignored talk of slowing down. He told reporters he would perform until 140 as a joke, but this time he admitted his body was winning. He told the Mexican reporters he had to listen to himself more. That was not a retirement speech, but it sounded close. The orchestra is not a side detail here. It is his family. When one member had a heart attack in Nottingham in 2016, André postponed the show. He said the orchestra's health mattered more than the audience's anger. That statement now comes back as a warning sign, because if the orchestra is family and the leader is weak, what future is left? Fans feared not just the loss of concerts, but the death of a time period. André built his shows into huge events that needed charter planes, custom stages, and months of practice. Few musicians have the size or discipline to replace him. His sickness doesn't just pause concerts. It threatens the survival of the whole Johann Strauss Orchestra as a touring force. That is why people mourn so quickly. They weren't only thinking of André. They were thinking of everything connected to his name. Pierre now carried the weight. He became the face of planning, refunds, and press meetings. His words had double meaning. When he said, the orchestra must go on, some heard confidence. Others heard a son getting ready to lead. Without a father, this is the weight we start with. André Rieu didn't die in Mexico, but the silence there made. People believe he had. For days, the rumor of his death traveled faster than the truth. And in a way, something did die that night. The idea that André could play forever without problems. That myth ended in Mexico. Don't worry, we will go in completely later. He had built an empire on music, yet it was never only his. The Johann Strauss Orchestra, the fancy dresses, the waltzes, it all worked because André Rieu turned concerts into worlds. But behind the sparkle, there were cracks. The same orchestra that looked immortal had lived through storms that almost destroyed it. Musicians walked out. Tours fell apart. Under money problems and more than. Once the Rieu family wondered if the empire would simply disappear overnight. Pierre saw it all, not as a fan but as the son forced to take over both the success and the weight. The cracks showed most clearly in the 2008 financial crash. While others cut back spending, André kept touring, spending millions on staging. It nearly ruined him. Cancellations followed. Rumors spread of bankruptcy, and suddenly the Waltz King looked weak. For the first time, his music wasn't enough to quiet the headlines. To Pierre, this was a practice run for what was to come. Because when your father is both a man and a brand, you learn early that one collapse always threatens the other. It wasn't only money. Health got in the way, too. A virus infection in 2010 left André unable to perform for months. Fans whispered about his death. Headlines said his career was finished. And yet he came back, bow in hand, as if nothing had happened. But Pierre remembered the silence of that house in Maastricht, the canceled practices, and the look in his father's eyes, fear, but also fighting spirit. He understood then that the death of a man and the death of his music might not happen together, but they would feel the same. That silence haunted the orchestra too. Members who had spent many years beside André began asking what would happen when he was gone. Who would lead? Would the orchestra survive without its founder? Or would it fall apart like a kingdom with no heir? Every time Pierre heard those whispers, he knew they weren't only about who would take over. They were about his father's weakness. And yet, none of them dared say out loud. The myth of living forever had to continue, at least on stage. André himself fed that myth. He kept planning tours that seemed bigger than human strength, stadiums filled with fireworks, movie-like staging, and endless travel. But as his music grew larger, so did the cost, physically, with money, emotionally. Friends say he worried over details to the point of exhaustion, as if controlling the show would delay what couldn't be stopped. But for Pierre, it was clear. The larger the empire grew, the more fragile it became. All it would take was one mistake, one canceled season, and everything could fall apart. There was another tension Pierre rarely talked about. His father wasn't only a musician. He was also a businessman who ruled with exactness. Those who worked under him knew the warmth of the maestro on stage could turn into endless perfectionism. Behind the curtain, practice sessions ran until dawn. Mistakes were punished. Standards were harsh. It made the orchestra perfect, but it also made it breakable. And Pierre saw how that same drive lived in his father's body, pushing him forward but wearing him down. Even in their personal life, music came before everything. Holidays, family events, and even sadness had to be planned around tours. Pierre has admitted it. Growing up, he sometimes wished his father would slow down, even stop. But stopping was never a choice. To André, slowing down meant admitting the waltzes had ended, and so the family lived in a constant rhythm of leaving and coming back, a rhythm that hid what was truly happening. His father's life was slowly being eaten up by the very music he had built his name on. What fans didn't know, Pierre did. The maestro's health had struggled more than once since that infection, each time forcing hard choices, each time hidden behind amazing shows. The man they loved was fighting battles his audiences never saw, and while the world kept dancing, his son counted the costs, waiting for the moment the silence would finally be permanent. But Pierre also knew something the fans didn't. When that moment came, it wouldn't only be the death of a man. It would be the death of a sound, a world, a way of life. And it was his job to tell it. The world thought André Rieu's empire was unshakable, a dream machine running on, endless waltzes and applause. But Pierre knew the truth. It had almost collapsed before, and every time it came back weaker, more fragile, like China glued together, but always at risk of breaking again. The breaking point came in 2011, a year after his virus infection had silenced him. André pushed himself back on a stage too quickly. The concerts were dazzling, the reviews excited, but behind the curtain, he was barely holding on. Pierre later admitted the family feared, not just for his career, but for his life. The strain of coming back after sickness sent shock waves through the orchestra. Cancellations piled up, costs grew, and audiences began to whisper that the king of the waltzes was fading. It was the closest the empire had ever come to collapse. For the orchestra, it felt like a plane in free fall. No one knew if the landing would be safe. Crew members quietly updated resumes. Some longtime musicians left altogether, unwilling to gamble their futures on a dream that might already be over. Pierre saw every person leaving not as betrayal, but as proof that the magic could vanish in an instant. To the public, his father smiled. At home, he fought with the question no artist ever wants to face. Had the music died before he did? The money pressure was brutal. Each canceled show cost millions. And with production costs growing, the empire hung by a thread of ticket sales and sponsors. André had always insisted on grandness. Cathedrals turned into concert halls, fireworks timed to Strauss, sweeping movie-like recordings that made the orchestra look untouchable. But grandness had a price. At one point, rumors spread that the family home itself might be at risk if debts couldn't be covered. Pierre never said yes to it, but he never said no either, and his silence spoke louder than words. It was during this crisis that Pierre's role changed. No longer just the son watching from the sidelines, he became the manager, the protector, the one forced to turn art into survival. He talked with event planners, calmed worried investors, and protected his father from the ugliest details. In interviews, he played down the struggles, but behind the mask, he carried the weight of saving both the music and the man. If he failed, the legacy his father had built for many years would end, not with applause, but with silence. The strain showed on André's face. For the first time, fans noticed the tiredness. Critics wrote about his age, guessing about retirement. Every canceled tour was treated as a signal that the end was near. Yet he refused to step back. Even when doctors told him to rest, he came back to the stage, bow in hand, as if each performance was proof he had beaten death again. To Pierre, it wasn't courage. It was an obsession. His father wasn't just fighting sickness. He was fighting time itself. And that obsession came with results. The orchestra began to break apart in subtle ways. Musicians talked about leadership. After André, would Pierre take over? Could anyone copy the presence of the maestro? Fans loved the orchestra, but they came for him. Without him, the empire was just another group of musicians. Pierre knew it, and so did they. It wasn't just the man at risk. It was the music itself. Then came the silence. In 2016, another health scare forced the cancellation of multiple tours. The details were unclear. The family tight-lipped, but insiders described it as a moment when André was forced to face his mortality. To the outside world, the announcement was simple: canceled concerts due to illness. To those close to him, it was something darker, a reminder that his body was no longer invincible. Fans begged for updates. Rumors spread online that he had secretly retired or even died. The truth was more complicated. The music had stopped, if only briefly, and in that pause, the illusion of living forever cracked wide open. Pierre carried that pause like a scar. He had watched audiences cry as if the world had already lost him, even though he was still alive. It was a preview of the reaction the day the silence became permanent, and it scared him because he understood something most people didn't. When his father's bow finally dropped, the loss would be felt not only as the death of a man, but as the death of an entire era of music. But the world wasn't ready to hear it. Fans held on to the fantasy. Reporters chased promises, and André himself kept saying there would be more. Yet Pierre knew the truth. The music was already dying piece by piece, tour by tour, silence by silence. And soon he would be forced to say what no son ever wants to say: goodbye. It began like a rumor and spread like wildfire. André Rieu had died. Fans and forums posted tributes. Strangers online mourned, and news outlets rushed to verify it wasn't the first time whispers had declared his end, but this one felt heavy because silence surrounded it. The orchestra gave no immediate statements. Pierre himself stayed absent, making people think that the worst had finally happened. For many, it felt real because the truth was already half expected. How many times can a man fight off illness, exhaustion, and collapse before the curtain finally falls? Tributes poured in as if the story were fact. Clips of his concerts came back up. Fans remembered first dances, weddings, moments when his waltzes added joy into their lives. Entire generations had lived with his music as background to their happiest memories. To imagine it gone was to imagine the loss of something deeply personal. The grief was real, even if the facts weren't. And for Pierre, watching this unfold was like witnessing a practice run for the inevitable. But then came the correction. André was still alive. The tragedy wasn't his death. It was something quieter, harder to explain, yet just as heartbreaking. Piece by piece, the music itself had been dying. Each canceled concert, each silence between tours, each strain on his body was not only the decline of a man, but the wearing away of a world he had built. The Waltz King had not left the stage permanently, but his empire no longer had the same immortality. Fans were mourning the truth. They could not yet admit that the sound they loved was slipping away. Pierre finally talked about it, not in a dramatic press release, but in thoughts that revealed what the audience had always feared. He spoke of the fragility, the strain, the toll his father had paid to keep the illusion alive. He admitted what insiders knew, but fans never wanted to face, that the orchestral empire could not go on forever, that the silence, when it finally arrived, would not only claim the man, but the music with him. It was not a question of if, but when. The irony was cruel. André had spent his entire life bringing back waltzes, convincing millions that a 100-year-old form of music still belonged in the modern world. He turned Strauss into a stadium show, dressing nostalgia in fireworks, and fancy dresses. Yet in doing so, he had tied his own life to a genre that could not exist without him. Unlike rock bands, unlike orchestras with rotating conductors, André's creation had no air. Pierre could manage the business, but he knew better than anyone. The magic lived in one man's bow. Without it, the sound died. This is why fans felt grief even while he lived. Every time the stage went dark, they experienced death in fragments, in the pauses, in the silences, in the fewer tours. The tragic truth wasn't that André Rieu had left them forever. It was that they were already losing him, slowly, relentlessly through time itself. And Pierre, more than anyone, was forced to watch as the world practiced its grief in advance. He once admitted that the day would come when Maastricht would fall silent, when the annual show of waltzes under the summer skies would vanish, leaving only memories. He did not frame it as a concert cancellation or a retirement. He called it what it truly was, the death of music, and he carried the burden of preparing the world for it. But was it really the end? As some of you might have guessed, he's still touring. That's the cruel twist. Even as fans cry about his death, André Rieu was already preparing his stage for something greater. Not an ending in silence, but a farewell so loud, so theatrical it would feel like a celebration of death itself. Because the Waltz King will not slip away quietly. He plans to go out with a bang. The proof is right there on his calendar. This year and next, his name is still on posters across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Abu Dhabi in October, Cologne and Frankfurt soon. After Romania, Austria, Budapest. And then, as if destiny demanded it, Maastricht. His home, his stage, his cathedral. The man they thought was dead is not hiding. He is building towards something only he could imagine, a concert series that doubles as his final salute. And it will not be subtle. He has never been subtle. Fireworks, cathedrals lit like heaven, orchestras dressed in gold. That is how he built his empire, and that is how he will close it. Each performance on this tour feels less like another date and more like another chapter in a requiem. One last grand story told not with words but with violins. Pierre has hinted before that his father does not understand moderation. If André were to plan his own farewell, it would not be a retirement party. It would be a staged funeral disguised as a show. Maastricht will be like his final goodbye, choirs filling the square, voices layered over violins until it feels like a cathedral in the open air. His orchestra swells, not with sound, but with history, every note carrying the weight of decades. And then the silence, that single moment, when the lights fall, the bow lowers, and the audience holds its breath, believing he will return. But he does not. No encore, no curtain call, just darkness, as if the music itself had died before their eyes. That is the ending he has been practicing all along. Not death in a hospital bed, not fading away quietly, but death as performance, theatrical, defiant, unforgettable.